Мы продолжаем серию наших вебинаров.
Hello, we are continuing our series of webinars, and our group, which is monitoring the environmental impacts of war in Ukraine. We are working together with Green Foundation, with other partners, and we spoke on various topics, like we spoke already about Kakhovka Dam destruction, about the ecology of soil, and we discussed many other things that happened as a result of the full-scale war. Today, we are going to talk about persecution of environmental activists in Belarus and Russia before the full-scale war and after the full-scale war. And today, Marina Dubina is going to present. She's from Eco Home organization, and Vitaly Servetnik from the Environmental Crisis Group. The format is the following. Each speaker will speak around 20 minutes. Afterwards, we will be happy to answer your questions, comments. All your questions and comments you can also write in the chat. We also have Q&A rubrics, and our speakers will be able to answer your questions after they are finished with their presentations. I would like to give the floor to Marina. Marina, tell us, please, what is happening in Belarus? What happened before the war and what changed since the full-scale war started? How are the environmental activists working now in Belarus? Hello to everyone. Of course, today's presentation I can't start without mentioning the events of 2020 and all other events that happened afterwards in Belarus in 2020, because all of them dramatically changed the political and civil life of Belarusians, and also they dramatically changed ecological environment and the work of the environmental groups working in Belarus, and the whole situation for the environmentalists in Belarus changed. The events of 2020 and further purges that followed were characterized by various forms of pressure on the representatives of various environmental organizations, as well as other activists, and as well as specific concrete individuals. These were various administrative offense reports, penalties, arrests, and at the beginning of 2021, there was a massive wave of the checks. They started checking all organizations, all NGOs, and also environmental NGOs. At the beginning, they just checked all the documents regarding the activity of the organization. But in July 2021, there was a mass wave of searches. So they searched the representative of environmental organizations, they searched their houses, and later on, the mass liquidation of organizations as well as environmental organizations started. At the current moment in Belarus, they liquidated a number of organizations. Sometimes organizations were even pushed to liquidate themselves. Sometimes the representatives of the environmental organizations were called for interrogation and pushed to close their organizations. As far as we know, there are around 110 ecological NGOs, environmental NGOs, and this wave of purges in Belarus touched absolutely all organizations. It doesn't matter on which topics they work. It could be, for example, some organization saving animals or some educational NGO. Also, I should say it doesn't matter how much the organizations cooperated with the state officials, they were still closed. There were, for example, organizations which before 2020 tried not to touch the political topics. And they were even cooperating with the local authorities or even implementing some common projects before 2020. But even those organizations were liquidated. We should understand that the purges of environmental activists in Belarus started not only after 2020, but they existed before. Namely, they were related to anti-nuclear activists or local activists fighting against some poisonous industries. For example, they were against the building of some accumulator factory. And Belarus was the country part of the European conventions, and it was a very important international tool for supporting and protecting activists. This is an international instrument and also an instrument for pressure, which was important for the environmentalists in Belarus. And here we can see a photo of Eco House or Eco Dom. It's an NGO which in 2021 was celebrating its 25th anniversary, and afterwards it was liquidated. Actually, it happened in 2 months after that. Many members of the organization had to leave the country because of the purges, and later it was named as an extremist organization. And in the framework of this convention in 2014, there was a case of the persecutions of anti-nuclear activists, and after that it became clear that all those mechanisms that exist in this convention, they are not enough for some immediate steps when one need to react immediately. Also in 2021, there was an information, there was a submission sent to the committee about the facts of the liquidation of Eco House. And then it was decided that the organization Ecodon was liquidated because of its environmental activity, and it was called a form of persecution, and it is not acceptable. And Belarus had to restore this organization to register it another time, but the state decided that this decision was very politicized, and as a result, Belarus decided to leave this convention. But due to such cases, cases on persecution of environmental activists, it became clear that we need special procedures, special mechanisms for immediate reaction. And in 2021, they adopted such a mechanism, and they appointed a special rapporteur on the environmental issues. At the current moment, it is Michel Forst. And this mechanism, unlike all the mechanisms that existed before, is supposed to react immediately on all the cases of the persecution of the environmentalists who are fighting for their rights. And due to those decisions that were accepted and made in the framework of Aarhus Convention, it became clear that it is not possible to protect the fundamental rights when the political rights are not respected in the country.
На данный момент в Беларуси уже на сегодня, к сожалению, 1519 политических заключенных.
Unfortunately, in
И
Belarus,
среди них есть ряд
there are
активистов
1,510
и инициативов.
political prisoners. Among them,
Нам
there
на
are
данный момент
a number of
известно о 9
eco-activists. Right now, we know
экологических
about
активистов,
9
которые находятся под
environmental
следствием в
activists,
местах лишения свободы.
men and women who are located in
Один
detention.
активист
One of the
отбывает срок
eco-activists,
месяца лишения свободы
while he was in prison, Витольд Ашурок died in prison. Officially, it was recognized, the cause was recognized as a heart attack, but all the circumstances of his death have not been established yet. 2 persons were sentenced to home chemical therapy, and 2 persons have served their sentences. They served 3 years in colonies. These are Sergei Petruchin and Alexander Kabanov. So right now they are free. But after Alexander Kabanov have left the country, after he was released from prison, a new criminal case was instigated against him. Among the political prisoners who were ecological activists, there are representatives of environmental protection organizations like Viktor Ferenchuk, an ornithologist. He used to be a director of Hub of Ptushek Batkovщины in Belarus. And these are also local activists or representatives of ecological initiatives. They have been sentenced to different terms from 2 to 8 years in prison colonies. You can support them by writing letters to them. You can find this information on the Vesna website and also on the Eco House website. After the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, Belarus continued the wave of repression against separate activists and against the civil society and organizations in general. And there is a new form of persecution, such as criminal cases for passing the information about movement of the Russian military equipment and transport, or sharing of photos or information about such equipment. For example, Pavel Nozdrya, an activist, has been sentenced to 2 years in prison camps as he was accused of promoting the activities of an extremist organization of this Telegram channel, Belarus Gayum. After the liquidation, many organizations unfortunately stopped their operations. A lot of activists were forced to leave the country, but at the same time, they still continue their environment protection operations outside and inside Belarus. They are trying to communicate with the citizens in the country, and they are raising very important environmental issues in other countries and cities where they are located. Here on the photo, you can see the Chernobyl Way, which used to be held in Belarus as a tradition, but now it is held also in other countries where the Belarus expats are present. So this Chernobyl Way was held in Vilnius, as you can see on the photo. So different activists and organizations continue their operations in exile. Yet another tendency, another trend is blocking the mass media outlets which highlight environmental issues on the territory of Belarus. Here we can see a screenshot with notification from the Russian supervisory agency Roskomnadzor, who notified a Belarusian agency and demanding them to remove their article about environmental consequences of the war for Ukraine, which is supported by the Green Portal. So the Green Portal was blocked both on the territory of Belarus and Russia. Also, in the recent year, other resources have been recognized as extremists. These are the resources of Ecodom or EcoHouse and the Green Portal. In Belarus, there is administrative responsibility for storage and sharing of these kind of materials. So we need to understand that if you use social networks or if you share any articles from these information resources, even in your communication exchanges, even if it is about the separate waste collection, or even if this is an article on the pollution from enterprises, people can be liable for administrative responsibility for this. People can be detained for administrative arrest or can be put a fine. Ecodom was recognized as an extremist organization according to the State Committee of Security and Safety. And after this decision, no clear reasons have been provided why this happened. And promotion and helping to this organization will be criminally punishable. As you remember, I have mentioned Pavel Nozdrya. So he was sentenced according to this article, promotion of the operation of an extremist organization. So he was sentenced to the 2 years in prison colony. So these repressions are taken not only against representatives of these organizations, but they are also threatening for all the activists who would like to cooperate with these resources. Some other negative trends, as I have mentioned, Belarus has left the Aarhus Convention. Also, Belarus has denounced the additional protocol to the International Pact on Civil and Political Rights. So now the Belarusians don't have the possibility to file claims to the Committee on Human Rights when their civil rights are violated, like their rights to peaceful gatherings or expressing their opinion. In 2023, on the 17th of August, Belarus decided to leave the Berne Convention on protection of flora and fauna. The Belarus has exceeded it 10 years ago in 2013, but now Belarus has decided that yet again it has been unjustifiably humiliated in its rights. So during the committee meeting in the end of 2022, they made a decision because Belarus is a co-aggressor in the war of Russia against Ukraine. It was decided that Belarus rights have to be limited in the Berne Convention. And in response, the Belarusian delegation left the meeting hall and decided to withdraw from the Berne Convention. So Belarus is not only depriving its citizens of important international mechanisms which allow citizens to protect their environmental rights and that allowed Belarusian people to seek help from the international community in the environmental area. But now Belarus is making one step after another towards international isolation. Thank you. Marina, thanks a lot. Dear friends, I would like to remind you that you can leave your comments, you can leave your questions in the chat box. Also, we have a Q&A section, and our speakers will try to answer to your questions after their presentations. Right now, I'm passing the floor to Vitaly Servetnik. He is going to tell us what has been happening, what is happening in Russia with persecution of environmental activists, what was happening before the war in Ukraine, after the full-scale invasion started. As well, Vitaly is representing the Environment Crisis Group. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to all those who have decided to dedicate their time to the issues of persecution of environmental activists in our countries. So I would like to speak a few words what Environmental Crisis Group is. This is our common initiative of the movement A Place to Live, and this group appeared in response to the situation of pressure against environmental activists in Russia in the years 16 and 18. So we appeared as an initiative, and we have been registering pressure against environmental activists in Russia. Probably I should tell you about the context, the general background in Russia. We have been monitoring the context from around the year 2000. So here we can see two parallel trends. First of all, this is an increase in the pressure against different civil society organizations, against civil society, not only environmental activists, but there was a pressure against the entire human rights protection organizations. So we share these trends with other colleagues. So starting with the rules and regulations on the freedom of meetings, then there were new regulations on the work of the non-commercial organizations and rules and regulations on the mass media. So all the journalists know about it. And there was another trend characteristic of the environmental organizations. This was the step-by-step relaxation of the environmental protection rules and regulations. First of all, the State Committee of Environmental Protection has been liquidated, which used to monitor the environment in Russia. So this was one of the first orders of the President Putin, to liquidate, to disband this agency, which marked the start of relaxation of the environmental legislation. And the academician Yablokov, a well-known environmental activist, coined this term of de-environmentalization of Russia. When the environmental rules are relaxed all the time, we have steps and jumps in this direction. So every time there was a crisis that could justify the new measures towards economy, for example, the hard times in the beginning of the 2000s, or then there was the economic crisis, then there was the COVID crisis. All these happenings and the war and sanctions in response to the war were not an exclusion. In the first months, there were suggestions to relax the environmental rules and regulations in order to support the economy. So this was yet another step to relax the environmental rules and regulations, and this only exacerbates the environmental problems, and this is causing conflicts related to the environmental problems. It causes protests of the population, and then yet higher pressure against environmental activists. So we are living among these two trends that are going on, that are continuing, and the war is only helping these trends to gain momentum. Another step of pressure against environmental activists was the law on the foreign agents which has been applied to the environment organizations as well. So we have been following the application of this law against environmental organizations and later against separate persons, environmental activists, and we have a separate list which includes 39 environmental foreign agents or environmental or ecological agents, as we can call them, because they are protecting the nature and environmental rights in Russia.
There are many nuances. I will not talk too long about it. In my presentation, you can see 39 or in the brackets 38 foreign agents, because one organization was in the list mentioned 2 times. Most of the organizations which were in this list had to close, and only a few organizations were removed from this list. 7 of them were removed from this register and continued their work, but most of them, like 28, were closed. And currently there are 4 organizations in this register, plus 2 people are inside, and as I said, 28 were closed. So some of the organizations were inside this register, then they left the register, but the fact is, most of the organizations, more than 2/3 of organizations, had to be closed. Not all of them stopped their activity. Some organizations continue to work. For example, their members started to work as experts or in other roles, but there was still purchase continuing. And why this law regarding foreign agents is so important in Russia? We are talking now about the pressure on environmental organizations. That was a kind of pressure
что тоже, безусловно, супер важно, своей территории, когда они что-то начинают под носом рубить, это организации, которые системно, которые институционализировались и системно занимались охраной природы, и во многом они занимались охраной природы на каких-то предварительных стадиях, на стадии оценки воздействия на окружающую среду, каких-то предварительных генеральных планов застройки и развития территории, и они могли...
Development of the territories. And they could
actually continue their.
Гражданское общество, да, привело к тому, что
And this institutionalized destruction of the activists weakened the organizations, and some of the members of those organizations stopped their activity. You probably heard that the certain parties were limited in communicating with the so-called foreign agents, and therefore the work of the environmental activists was very weakened. And as a result, there were new conflicts, which we noticed in 2016, 2018. We can come back to this slide. You can see, for example, here a small park in Yekaterinburg. And there are also protests in Komi, in Shees town, and in Kushtau in Bashkortostan. They are very known protests. And of course, there are no organizations functioning in Russia.
В более ранних стадиях приводят к непосредственному появлению экологических конфликтов, столкновений, протестов и, соответственно, давления на экологические.
And accordingly, pressure against environmental activists. This is the general picture of what has been happening. We can say that because of these trends, during So in this year, we can see the increasing pressure against environmental activists and environmental organizations from year to year. And the 2022 was not an exception. We can see the numbers here. For example, in 2022, we have registered more than 300 of new episodes of pressure against environmental activists. Of course, 200, we can see that the number here, 239 environmental activists have been pressurized. So some of them were pressurized regularly or several times. This is frequently happening. We have registered that 19 organizations and that were under pressure, and those cases were registered in 25 regions of Russia. In 2022, there was a death of environmental activist who committed suicide, and it was connected with the multi-million fine imposed on him and on his organization by the government. And this is related to his environmental activities. So this is Stanitsa Poltavskaya, which is campaigning against a landfill. Unfortunately, every year we register deaths of environmental activists due to different circumstances. Also in 2022, 47 activists have been attacked in different forms. It could be a physical attack, or they were attacked during the protests, and also their assets, their property had been damaged. Here we can also say that we can also see such form of pressure as coercive psychiatry. It is still used in Russia. So we have a list of 5 environmental activists who were put to psychological treatment in a coercive way due to their environmental activities. One of the recent cases was the case of Ms. Kuzmina, the environmental activist. One of the most recent cases which happened this year. And the pressure was going on in 2022. Also, the eco-activists are facing criminal and administrative pressure and persecution. They are facing fines. In 2022, the total amount of fines was over 2 million rubles. We have criminal cases instigated against environmental activists. Some of them have been sentenced to real terms in prison. Some of the court decisions had been cancelled, but in 2022, we have witnessed an increase in the number of criminal sentences. So we can see the 2 processes here. First of all, this is the continuation of the previous 2 trends I have mentioned before. The increasing pressure against environmental activists due to the authoritarian system and with the global environmental situation, because the economy needs more and more resources, which is in conflict with the environment. And also the war impacted the situation of pressure against the environmental activists. We have a separate overview that we started in 2022. And it shows the increasing pressure against environmental activists using the so-called anti-war articles, like discrediting. So we have a separate overview on the pressure against the environmental activists using the anti-war articles of laws. I will tell you about the numbers and statistics, and I will give you a link to the website where you can read the statistics if it's difficult to perceive during the speech. So we are conducting a separate monitoring, a separate list regarding the pressure on the environmental activists for their activities and opinions due to different reasons. Of course, the war is harming the environment in different ways, but for us it was important to continue the monitoring of how the environmental activists are persecuted for their environmental protection, but also we pay attention to the situation when they are persecuted for their anti-war stance. Though we have divided these two types of monitoring, we can still say that the pressure on the environmental activists for their environmental protection activities is still growing on and on. Although some of the environmental activists started to campaign against the war, but also the cases of pressure on their ecological stance has been growing. And there appeared yet another list of people persecuted for their anti-war activities. Here you can see, and you can say that during the 18 months of war, in August we have updated our statistics. We have a list on our website which is constantly updated. We have registered 65 environmental activists who had been pressurized for their anti-war statements and activities in different regions of Russia. And we already have 6 criminal sentences. There are more criminal cases underway, which are considered by the courts. Here you can see the number of activists in different regions who have been persecuted for their anti-war stance, anti-war statements. We can see the number of administrative protocols, administrative reports, and we can see the number of criminal cases. If we have a look at different regions, we can underline that they coincide with the most active regions in terms of environment protection. And this allows us to connect this with the fact that when the activists start to deal with their local environment problems, they are facing more and more challenges with the system, which is reluctant to respond to the environmental problems. Then they start asking more global questions: why you don't respond to the environmental problems, why the system doesn't work properly. And this increases the protest attitudes and sentiments and the anti-war activities as well. So we can see that Arkhangelsk region and the Republic of Komi are the leaders for these indicators. Literally, they are the leaders in all the three three charts. I would like to get back to this chart. This was the research, the poll of the Levada Center this is the poll about the problems worrying the Russian society in 2022. And we can see that the environmental problems in different forms, these are the first 2 lines. The people are most worried about the environment. Regardless whether they believe this is a political problem or not, this is yet another big conversation, but these environmental problems are very relevant and important for Russia. And in many ways, they are the catalysts as we talk about it. The environmental problems make real citizens from out of the residents of Russia, because first of all they are trying to resolve their environmental problems, and then they move on to other social problems as well. Now I would like to make my 2 last statements. So one of the points is that the resistance is not futile, it's not in vain. it may seem, from the outside, it may seem that it's impossible to do anything in Russia. Nobody has been left there. It's impossible to achieve anything there. But we have a response to this. In 2022, we had big and small ecological victories. We need to understand that the environmental problems are impossible to resolve in a final way, in a conclusive way. For example, if a quarry is closed in several years, another quarry may appear, another mineral resource centers can appear. So the environmental damage can continue in several years after our victory. But anyway, we have achieved something in 2022, and we can say that it's not only possible to do environmental activism in Russia, but you can achieve some victories as well. And yet another victory is the cases when the environmental activists were successful in defending their cases. We had over 15 cases in 2022 and in 2021, which demonstrate that it's possible to defend yourself from persecution. That is why the resistance is not in vain. Nobody can guarantee that you can protect your rights in Russia, but these cases are present. These cases are there, so it's worth trying. And the last thing I would like to mention is that on our website of the Environmental Crisis Group, we have a lot of different types of information, a lot of pieces of information that you can use as tools to analyze the situation. We publish a monthly report of pressure against activists. We have monthly reports and annual reports. We have different kinds of tables. I can't show it right now, but we have a table where you can search information in different regions. So if you are preparing a piece of material, a piece of news in different regions, you can filter the information because we get a lot of requests from the investigative journalists. And here it is always possible to find economic interests in every environmental conflict. Usually these campaigns can be connected to some government officials or some business people, because very often we are lacking resources to follow through down to the perpetrators and to the driving forces. But on the website we have a big volume of materials that you can use. We have a list of foreign environmental agents or another list of unwanted agents. We have cases of pressure on environmental activists, on the anti-nuclear activists. We have coercive psychology materials. So we are encouraging you to use our platform, our materials. If you feel more comfortable to use English language in your work, our colleagues from Norway, for example, on the right, you can see the cover of the recent report which appeared this summer. So they have been publishing reports every year for many years, describing the situation with the civil society in Russia. And they have a separate section dealing with the trends and possibilities to support environmental movements and activists in Russia, because right now some people are asking on how they can support Russia and their environmental protection life. Yes, you can do it. You can support them. We will describe everything, so you can use these reports as your resource. Probably I'm going to finish right now, and we are ready to answer your questions right now or later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vitaly. Thank you so much, Marina. We have several questions now in our Q&A section. First question is to Marina. How Belarusian environmental organizations are supporting Ukraine during the full-scale war? We, as an organization called Eco House, or EcoDom. We are also members of UWEC, and the green portal, it's a Belarusian portal, is making chronicles of the ecological impact after the full-scale war. And we prepared many publications on our website, and we made the publications on how we can support various environmental organizations in Ukraine, taking into account what is now happening in the country and how people can be informed about the environmental impacts. Thank you so much, Marina. Vitaly, next question is to you. I think that you want to add something. Can it be that somebody wants to add? No. Okay, then I'm sorry. I misunderstood something. A question to Vitaly. Irina, you wanted to say something. I just wanted to add to what Marina said. What we've done after this full-scale invasion, together with Ukrainian colleagues, we organized a series of webinars and advocating in Germany. Actually, we organized events together with politicians, so that people were refusing Russian gas quicker. And organization Eco House was cooperating with Ukrainian partners, and we are trying to support them as much as we can. So these are the specific activities we organized in 2022 when we participated in the campaign of blocking Russian gas. Thank you so much for this comment. Vitaly, question to you. Are there any projects on monitoring of the persecution of environmental activists on occupied territories? Unfortunately, we can't organize such monitoring because it is very difficult to work on those territories. We have limited resources. Therefore, unfortunately, my answer is no. Next question to Marina and Vitaly. Vitaly, you already spoke slightly about that in your final speech. How an international environmental community can help? How, via which structures, whom should they contact, etc. Marina, maybe you want to be first? Yes, thank you for this question. How can we help? On our website, we are posting information about environmental activists who are now in prison. And the first thing, how you can support them. Unfortunately, usually the only way of support is correspondence. These activists are not always receiving all the letters that people are sending to them, but still it's a way to support them. It's a way to show them they are not forgotten. Another important thing is to share the stories about these activists, to tell what they did before. And as I already mentioned, in Belarus, we are currently have more than 1,500 political prisoners, and not all of their stories are known to people. Therefore, we are trying to support those people. We are telling about their stories. And of course, there are various organizations in Belarus, for example, befor, or another human rights defense organization. They are helping the prisoners who recently were released, and we think that it's important to support the activity of such organizations. One can also, for example, enter by sole organization. Main thing is you are not on the territory of Belarus or Russia. If you are on the territory of another country, you can donate to this organization. You can help with money. And later this money will be spent on those prisoners or in order to pay the work of the lawyers, because usually it's a very big burden, financial burden for the families of prisoners. Not all prisoners have the possibility to pay these costs. Therefore, we think it's important to talk about it and to help these people. Thank you. Thank you, Marina. Vitaly?
Да, ну, значит, вопрос про поддержку, да, значит, я
Yes, the question is regarding support.
Какой имеет смысл, да.
Yeah, how to support. I will try to answer. If we speak from the support from inside, from Russia, we have a separate Telegram channel for the support, and every day we are telling the stories about activists in this Telegram channel. We are trying to formulate the ideas how one can help those activists. We also try to emphasize that we are environmental project, and we would like also to emphasize to draw the attention to the ecological problems because of which these people were persecuted. If there is some petition, for example, or one can submit some complaint to certain bodies, then we of course support such activities. And I'm now talking about the environmental prisoners, for example, those who were put into prison because of their environmental position. So support of various petitions. For example, those petitions that those imprisoned activists were in charge of. And we try to not to forget about solidarity. We are sometimes writing about the persecutions of activists in other countries, like in Belarus, for example, so that people understood that these activists are persecuted not only in Russia, but in other countries as well. In such a way, we show our solidarity. If we speak about support from foreign countries, there are also various ways. If we know that in Russia, some people continue their fight on the territory of Russia. It's important to inform about it the foreign parties and foreign partners. It is important for them to know that despite all the difficulties in Russia, the fight continues, and that we need to differentiate between political elite and activists or just normal civilians who may not share the position of the political elite and who continue fighting against Putin regime. And it is not correct to isolate those activists who continue fighting the regime. This is not correct. And it doesn't help to develop the civil society, but vice versa. It helps Putin in his politics. And of course, one can support the organizations which, despite all the difficulties, continue cooperation with Russian activists. Of course, it's not public because of certain risks for their safety, but just try to contact national organizations in your country which cooperate with Russian organizations, or you can contact us and we will tell you more about various ways of support, because I can't voice all of the ways you can support right now. But the support is very important, and due to our monitoring, we can see that there is a big need in the support in the situation of this war and difficult times for our countries. Thank you, Vitaly. We have several more questions from Ekaterina Rukavtseva from Kedr Media. biggest amount of the environmental activists were put in the list after the full-scale war started. Is it correct? Or maybe they are just doing it more frequently since the war started. Can you notice such trends? I can't agree 100% with this, because if we look at the statistics, on our website we have a list of the ecological organizations, and there was 1 year, I think 2012 or something like that. I think 2015 or 2016, it was a year when the biggest amount of environmental organizations were named as foreign agents. First, they were putting in the list some human rights defendants, and later the organizations working with environmental issues. Later, the most prominent and known organizations were included in this list. Then some of the organizations were closing, and then there was some decrease in this number. And it's clear in 2022, 5 organizations after the full-scale invasion were included in the list, but in 2015 and 16 this number was even higher. In 2022 they changed the legislation regarding the foreign agent. They were step by step changing this legislation actually every year, and in 2022 it was even allowed to put in this list unregistered organizations, because previously many organizations were deliberately not registering themselves so that to avoid certain risks. And there was a deterioration of the situation in 2022. But it is quite logical. Because of the war, the system started to react stricter, and they started to eliminate all people who don't agree with the system. They started to make penalties. Some people had to remove their announcements or stop fighting. And in general, there was some increase in number of such organizations that were closed. There were more organizations included in the list which were considered to be dangerous. But this topic about the evolution of those purges, it's a separate topic for us. We can speak long about it. Naming the organization as a foreign agent is not enough in order to stop its functioning. And it's not enough to stop Russian activists fighting for their rights. And now they are actually criminalizing such cooperation of activists with foreign partners. But till today, it is still possible to cooperate with foreign partners. Vitaly, next question to you again. You said if you look at the amount of persecutions, which activists are persecuted more often, environmentalists or anti-war activists? Now, the amount of cases is higher in case of environmental activists. There are more penalties. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but actually the amount of cases with environmental activists, of course, this number is higher. There are also many cases of protests.
We have a lot of cases in the Moscow region. We can speak separately why this is happening in bigger cities, because there is a clash of interests between the highly educated population and the developers and mineral resource enterprises. who are in private hands, but we can see that persecution is higher in the environmental domain rather than in the anti-war domain. But we can see that a lot of environmental activists stay in Russia because they would like to defend their territory, their forest, their rivers and parks, but they have to use self-censorship and they have to choose between the environmental risks and use self-censorship to avoid expressing their opinions about the war. So people have to make this compromise. And a specifying question to you. When you have been talking about the statistics, you mean the environmental activists? Yes. So they are persecuted both for the eco-activism and for their anti-war activism. You are not talking solely about anti-war activism. Yes, we are talking about eco-activists who are persecuted for their anti-war stance as well. Yes, we have this verification criteria to decide whether an activist is anti-war or environmental. So in our list, we have only those activists who are persecuted for the anti-war activities, which are also identified as an environmental activists who used to protect the nature, but they have suffered for their anti-war stance. Some activists continue to work both in the anti-war and environmental domain, as we can see. Marina, the same question is to you. If we compare the persecution, is it more for the anti-war stance or for the environmental activities? Thank you for the question. More people are persecuted for their political and civil society activities, which is connected with the so-called extremist articles in Belarus and after the events of the protests in 2020. So these are the articles or the charges for criminal responsibility, like participation in the protest actions, in the demonstrations, or some articles about organizing an extremist organization or supporting it, or preparation of activities to disrupt the public order, or funding the disruption of public order. Or, as I have mentioned, this can also be support of the operations of the extremist organization. And all the independent mass media in Belarus had been recognized as extremist organizations. And consequently, the recent trend is to use closed court considerations. That's why we are not always able to understand why the person was sentenced and what the charges were. For example, the last court decision was about Anna Skryga, the candidate of geographical sciences. She is a professor of the university, and she was sentenced according to the article of inflammation of hatred, and it doesn't quote the specific charges because the case is considered in the closed procedure, and we only know the order of the court. So Anna Skryga was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Some articles may concern comments on the social networks or comments in their personal correspondence, but we don't know the nature of these communications, and we don't know the specific articles of the criminal code because it's impossible. Also, today I mentioned some political prisoners. These are the political prisoners who have also been sentenced according to the articles related to their activities after 2020 in Belarus. However, they used to be environmental activists or representatives of environmental organizations. They were not sentenced for their eco-activism, but we are discussing them because they had made a big contribution into the environment protection, or they were important local eco-activists. That's why we mentioned them. But today I did not mention the continuing repressions in the form of administrative detentions, like administrative arrests and the searches that are going on in Belarus. And here we can see the trend that this form of pressure is used against all the activists who are protecting their environmental rights, among other things. One of the recent cases is that there have been more than 10 searches of the houses of 10 residents who were collecting signatures against expansion of an enterprise who could have deteriorating effect on the environment. Or a director of a cultural house decided to make a query why some of the trees were fallen down, and he was detained and he was sentenced to 15 days in detention. So they are charged, these activists are charged with hooliganism or refusal to cooperate with the law enforcement officers. So as we can see, that repressions in Belarus are continuing, both for the political activism and environmental activism as well. And of course, people have to be careful about their freedom, and sometimes people just self-censor themselves. They are trying not to give this information out. For example, if an activist can give some information to the mass media, and then they are charged with a criminal case, because this mass media may be recognized as an extremist organization, and if an activist is given a comment to the extremist mass media, they are charged with supporting the extremist organization. Sometimes the activists are reluctant to make any comments, or sometimes they are asking mass media to remove their comments from the materials, from the reports, to avoid repressions. Thank you for this explanation, Marina. So, dear friends, I don't see any new questions from our participants. So I suggest to conclude our work for today. Thank you, Vitaly. Thank you, Marina, for joining us today on this Saturday morning to describe what is happening today in Belarus and Russia in the persecution of eco-activists and how the situation has changed after the start of the full-scale invasion to Ukraine. Thanks to the interpreters, thanks to the technical support team and to the organizers. Dear friends, thanks a lot. Dear listeners, thank you for participating, for asking the questions. I would like to remind you that the recording will be available on the YouTube channel of our expert group, which is monitoring the environmental and climatic consequences of the war in Ukraine, our eco group. Also on our website, you can register for our next webinars. Please follow our notifications. And also we have a specialized Telegram group where we post our new articles and we notify everybody about our new webinars for the forthcoming months. You can join our Telegram group. The link is located on our website. Thanks a lot to everybody. I wish everybody a good day and a good weekend, and we shall stay in touch. Thank you.